Welcome, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I am your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with the show, my guests and I will cover every angle of real estate under the sun, from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington. Anything that affects our local real estate markets will be covered here. If you got credit issues, you can call me. If you're looking to buy or sell a home, or you're in a distressed situation and you're trying to figure out what your options are as far as, contemplating short sale versus foreclosure, or, you're just burying your head in the sand because you're really unsure of what the options are, reach out to me. I'd be glad to give you a consultation and point you in the right direction and a professional that can help you out. Also, if you're looking to refinance to the lowest rates in U.S. history, and you're just trying to see if it makes sense to do so, which in most cases it will, because, rates are obviously at historic lows right now. Make sure you tune in and join us every Monday at WNEW 1580 AM from 2 to 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And please call the off-air number with any questions. It's 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030, or via the web at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. There's a Ask a Question button on the right-hand side. Feel free to click that, and I'll be glad to email my response back by the end of the day. Remember, if it's real estate, it's covered here. Got a great show lined up for you guys today. Joining me on our panel to discuss the many issues of last week and what's on deck this week that can affect you and your real estate decisions is Louis Cammarosano, who's the general manager of HomeGain. Louis is often cited in the media as an industry expert in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN Money, Fox Business, Smart Money, MSN, and numerous others. How you doing today, Louis?
I'm good. And yourself, Ryan?
I'm doing pretty well. It was a crazy eventful weekend here in the metropolitan area with all those crazy storms that were taking place.
I heard about that. You have a lot of power outages in the area?
Yeah, all over the place. As a matter of fact, the radio station itself just got power back this morning. But, a lot of Maryland, they were saying that like almost half of Maryland was without power, many of which are still without power. I'm in the Northern Virginia area. My house itself didn't lose power, but some of the surrounding neighborhoods did. But, it was, 100 to 105 degrees for the last 3 days, so it was brewing up some pretty, nasty storms. Yeah, so it was quite
Is it over?
Yeah, it's over now. Now we're back down into like the mid-90s, and it seems like everything is behind us at this point. They're just trying to get everybody, with their power back up and going, so, they're not having to eat out just to get the air conditioning. So, it was pretty interesting. Obviously, last week we had, some interesting things happen. Obviously, the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of Obamacare and upheld the decision to keep it moving forward. We had discussed last week that we thought that they were probably going to strike it down, but they obviously chose not to.
We thought they were going to strike it down
based on the mandate.
Commerce Clause, right? And they did not rule it constitutional on the basis of the Commerce Clause. They ruled it as a tax, which there's nothing to indicate in the legislation that it was a tax, but they decided to go with that distinction. And, it's leading a lot of people to question if it wasn't written as a tax, and if the president said it wasn't a tax, why the Supreme Court strained to call it a tax, especially since if it was a tax, they could have written it as a tax to pay for the Obamacare, but they didn't. It's a $2,000 penalty, which would not cover the cost of insurance. So it seems a bit odd because if you didn't want to do the Commerce Clause, for some reason you thought that was overreaching, having it as a tax still sets a bad precedent because they could say if you don't buy a car, we're going to tax you under our taxing authority. So it seems to be I don't think we've heard the end of this yet. But one thing I wanted to mention, Ryan, putting aside the whole whether it's constitutional and whether it's a tax or a penalty, there's an overlooked provision in the bill, though, that is a tax and does apply directly to real estate. Are you aware of the 3.8% tax that applies to sales of principal residences over $500,000?
Yes, I was aware. I think we might have briefly mentioned it on one of the prior shows. And I actually got some detailed information on that, basically on who it's actually going to affect, which is really so technically it's going to affect anybody that's making couples making adjusted gross income over $250,000 or individual with adjusted gross income of $200,000. So it's basically going to probably affect the 5% of people in the United States. And the way that it breaks down is that if you were to sell your primary residence they're going to exclude the first 500,000 that was already been in place, and they're going to tax the amount above that 500,000. If you're a couple or if you're single, it'll be 250,000 at, like you said, Louis, 3.8%, I believe it is.
Yes, and thanks for that, Ron. There's also one other. It's not just applying to people making over 200 singles or 250. They'll take your adjusted gross income, including the amount that you make over the 500 on the sale of home, and then add in your income. So even if your income is only 100,000, that's going to count as the amount over the 500,000 exclusion.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good breakdown out there. And this is kind of interesting because this is one of the things that's not really it's not talked about. It was another one of those little things that leaked into the health reform package. And, once again, it's just hitting the pockets of Americans all over again.
Well, it's not a little thing, especially one of the problems I have with these national decisions is, it's going to impact the Washington, D.C. metro area, New York, San Francisco, areas where the average home price is around $500,000.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they did say, though, that it was going to be on the actual profit that was taken from the property, not the what they actually, bought it for, and then what they're selling it for. You know what I mean? So if they bought it for $100,000, the profit only ends up being $300,000. That's what it is, not the actual total amount.
Well, sure, but your ability to earn those types of because you're already paying more on the house to begin with, you're more likely to have the $500,000 plus. Plus, you're also going to have more likely to have $100,000 in earnings living in the high cost area.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel the same way. I think in the D.C. metro area, it's definitely going to be a big deal. Like you said, also out on the West Coast where you're at, and also New York, and some of the other, where incomes are much higher, it's definitely going to affect them.
The question is whether people will not sell these homes when they can, but rather take them off the market instead of taking the hit and convert them to rentals and collect the rental income where they won't be subject to that tax.
Yeah. Or
if that happens, that's bad for the housing market.
Absolutely. Or, they might get creative and maybe try to do like the 1031 tax exchanges or something where they don't have to recognize that income.
The problem is anytime you have a tax, people engage in unproductive behavior known as trying to evade the tax in some legal or illegal way.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like you said, I think that, at the end of the day, I think we're not done with this matter, obviously, coming up with, after we get through the actual presidential election.
Well, I think even before then, I just saw that the governor of Florida is not going to implement the Obamacare. I mean, the states do have this 10th Amendment nullification right where they can decide if they don't think a law is constitutional, the state itself can deem it unconstitutional. And
there's been a lot of, backlash from a lot of businesses, as we spoke about last week, that, at a certain point, they're going to be like, well, if you have 50 employees or more, they might just take and decide to pay the penalty because it's going to be less expensive for them to pay the penalty than it is to insure all their employees.
Well, it also would be that, if you think about it, you could have millions of Americans decide not to get insured, pay the penalty, which is cheaper than the insurance, wait to get sick, and then claim, hey, you can't deny me insurance for a preexisting condition. On the way to the hospital, sign up for insurance. Yeah. And, that could be a real disaster if people wake up to the fact that it really is only a $2,000 penalty or tax, whatever you want to call it, but it's cheaper than getting the insurance. And why not go without insurance if you can afford to pay the $2,000 and you can get insurance when you need it?
Yeah, and I think also in that bill they wanted to actually take and add another 12,000 IRS agents that were going to be basically the watchdogs to make sure that people were acquiring insurance or not, and to make sure that they were paying the penalty if they didn't have it. Yeah, well, if you read the decision, though, one of the reasons they went along with this was that somehow the IRS enforcement provisions are not as strict as if it were a regular income tax. To me, the whole thing is internally inconsistent. It doesn't make a stitch of sense what they did other than they strained to uphold it and put it in the tax area. But there's so many ways now you'll see in practice people trying to get out of it, whether they're employers or employees, and that may take the guts out of it anyway. Yep. Especially also, I know that the Obama administration has already given waivers to certain companies, obviously the favorite companies, and then, if you have a different president and he gives a waiver to the states,
This is something on a national level is probably better dealt with at the state or local level, national health care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's going to be a mess, and I don't think we've seen the end of it. And the real issue is, because it's going to be a mess, people are going to be spending enormous amounts of time, intellectual capital on this, and we still have, an unemployment problem. We have a debt crisis, which is kind of going to be pushed aside as people try to figure out how to either work within the Obamacare system or try to get out of it or try to repeal it.
Yeah, it seems like so much of what's going on is just counterproductive to the whole thing, where they want to talk about jobs and the employment situation all day long, but I mean, pretty much everything that they're implementing is hindering this. Nobody's able to, or nobody wants to at this point. If they're having to hire attorneys to investigate how this bill is going to affect them and their company, they're not going to spend, more money to go out there and recruit and hire new people to try to grow their business when they have,
or make capital investments that'll help grow the economy. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they're really just sitting back and saying, well, until all this clears up, we're not doing anything. So to me, that kind of says that for the next couple of years, I mean, everybody's going to be somewhat in a holding pattern until this is completely, figured out.
It would have been a better decision if the court had decided, look, you didn't label it a tax. It might be constitutional as a tax, so we'll send it back to you rather than them rewriting it and say, go ahead and try to put it through as a tax. Now, the problem there was they knew that if they sent it back to Congress, Congress would never have voted for a tax, especially the current Congress, in order to get this through. And, in fact, it only passed by 3 or 4 votes in the House in the first place under the penalty concept. So it's interesting that you've got a Congress of 2 years ago that's no longer in power that has left us with a bill that's supposed to last forever unless it can be repealed.
Yeah, which is what might happen. It'll be. That's why I said I think it is going to be interesting over the next couple of months what transpires. I definitely think that for business sake and for the employment situation, it's definitely not going to be a good thing.
Because we're going to be focused on the rights and wrongs, the constitutionality, the unconstitutionality, the tax or penalty, states' rights, not states' rights of this whole issue when it doesn't advance the economy in any way, shape, or form, other than giving lawyers something to do.
You're right. The lawyers are the ones who are definitely going to benefit from this entire situation.
And, of course, the advertisers. There's going to be a lot of advertising on this, people for it, people against it, and so on.
Yeah, this we had all that going on last week. Now, obviously, this is the holiday week for the 4th of July, which actually falls in the middle of this week. So, trading volumes are probably going to definitely be thinner than usual because a lot of people on Wall Street take off this week. There's some other key measurements this week, which is the June ISM reports. The manufacturing report came out actually today. Stocks actually were sinking this morning on the week report. I believe that it contracted in June for the first time in 3 years. So that's also, a negative indicator of what's going on out there. Later this week, we have the weekly.
Oh, by the way, the manufacturing makes up 19% of the economy and 9% of the jobs. So for it to go down for the first time in 3 years is not good news.
When we're supposedly, turning things around. That's definitely not a good indicator there. Later this week, we also have the weekly claims on Thursday and the June employment data on Friday. The early forecast for the employment report, the non-farm payrolls is at plus 100,000 and the non-farm private jobs at plus 105,000 with the unemployment rate unchanged at 8.2%. So those are the big reports this week that could really affect interest rates up or down. So if you're out there and you're trying to determine if you're going to lock in your rate, you're purchasing a home and you're in a floating pattern right now, just know that these reports can drastically, affect interest rates one way or the other. Now, with it being a holiday week, there might not be much trading. Traders tend to take a lot off the table during the holiday week, so I don't really think that there's going to be much movement one way or the other, but, it's definitely something for you guys to keep your eyes on. We're coming up on a break. When we come back, we're going to jump into the cost of owning a home. We're going to give you a comparison of what that's like over the last 20 years. When we come back, stay right there.